They called her a liar. Then the Admiral stepped in, looked at the ink, and whispered, "Let her go." Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent their evenings watching television or gossiping on the phone, she buried herself in books about military history and strategy. Her bedroom walls were covered with maps of famous battles and photographs of naval vessels. Her father, a mechanic at the local garage, often joked that his daughter knew more about submarines than most sailors. The obsession began when Sarah was 12 years old. Her grandfather, a World War II veteran, had given her his old military trunk before he passed away. Inside, she discovered yellowed photographs, service medals, and most importantly, a collection of letters written in different hands. Some were in English, others in what appeared to be German. Her grandfather had never spoken about the war, taking his secrets to the grave. Sarah spent months learning basic German from library books, slowly translating fragments of the letters. What she discovered made her hands tremble. The letters contained detailed information about submarine movements, supply routes, and planned attacks. They were signed with code names and contained references to locations she could identify on her grandfather's old naval charts. By the time she turned 17, Sarah had pieced together what she believed was evidence of a German spy network operating along the Texas coast during World War II. The letters described secret meetings, money exchanges, and plans to sabotage American naval operations. More shocking still, some letters were signed by people whose names appeared on the town's war memorial as local heroes. Sarah knew she had stumbled upon something significant. The evidence suggested that her quiet hometown had been the center of enemy espionage operations decades earlier. Several prominent families whose descendants still lived in town and held positions of respect appeared to have been involved in activities that bordered on treason. Armed with her translations and research, Sarah decided to take her findings to the local newspaper. The editor, Mr. Thompson, was a friend of her father's and had always encouraged her academic interests. She carefully laid out the letters, her translations, and the connections she had drawn between the coded messages and historical events. Thompson examined the documents with growing skepticism. The handwriting looked too fresh, he claimed. The paper didn't seem old enough. Most damning of all, he pointed out that some of the military terminology Sarah had translated didn't match the language used during that time period. Within an hour, Thompson had convinced himself that Sarah had fabricated the entire story. Word spread quickly through the small town. By the next morning, everyone knew that Sarah Martinez, the weird girl who spent too much time reading war books, had tried to pass off fake historical documents as the real thing. The reaction was swift and brutal. Teachers who had once praised her intelligence now looked at her with suspicion. Classmates whispered behind her back, calling her a liar and attention seeker. The situation became worse when Thompson published an article in the weekly newspaper. He didn't mention Sarah by name, but everyone knew who he meant when he wrote about local students who fabricate historical evidence for personal gain. The article suggested that Sarah had created the documents as part of some misguided attempt to write a sensational story for a school project. Sarah's parents were mortified. Her father stopped talking about his daughter's intelligence and academic achievements. Her mother began making excuses for why Sarah couldn't attend social gatherings. The family became isolated, bearing the shame of having raised a child who would lie about something as sacred as wartime history. At school, the situation grew unbearable. Former friends crossed the street to avoid her. Teachers questioned every assignment she submitted, checking for signs of dishonesty. The guidance counselor suggested that Sarah might benefit from psychological counseling to address her reality issues. College. Recommendation letters that had once seemed guaranteed now appeared unlikely. Sarah retreated further into isolation, spending her days re-examining the documents and questioning her own conclusions. Perhaps she had made mistakes in translation. Maybe her grandfather's trunk contained nothing more than souvenirs and meaningless correspondence. The constant doubt and public humiliation began to erode her confidence in her own abilities. The breaking point came during a school assembly about academic integrity. The principal used Sarah's case as an example of how fabricating evidence could destroy a student's reputation and future prospects. Though he didn't use her name, Every person in the auditorium turned to stare at her. Sarah ran from the assembly hall in tears, convinced that her life in the small town was effectively over. That evening, Sarah sat in her bedroom surrounded by the documents that had caused so much trouble. She considered burning them all, erasing the evidence of what everyone believed was her elaborate deception. As she held a match near the first letter, something caught her eye. In the corner of one envelope, barely visible unless held at the right angle, was a small embossed seal she had never noticed before. The embossed seal was tiny, no larger than a pinhead, but when Sarah held it under her desk lamp with a magnifying glass, she could make out what appeared to be an anchor surrounded by stars. Her heart began racing as she examined the other letters more carefully. 3 more envelopes contained the same barely visible marking. Sarah spent the next week researching military seals and insignia at the county library. The librarian, Mrs. Chen, was the only adult in town who still treated her with kindness. When Sarah explained what she was looking for, Mrs. Chen helped her access military archives through the library's computer system. After hours of searching, they found it. The seal belonged to the United States Naval Intelligence Office, specifically a subdivision that handled counter-espionage operations during World War II. The marking was used to authenticate documents related to ongoing investigations into enemy activities on American soil. This discovery changed everything. If the letters contained official naval intelligence seals, they couldn't possibly be forgeries created by a 17-year-old girl. Sarah realized that her grandfather hadn't been hiding evidence of German spies. He had been part of the American operation to catch them. Mrs. Chen helped Sarah contact the National Archives in Washington, D.C. After several phone transfers and long explanations, Sarah spoke with Dr. Elizabeth Warren, a historian who specialized in wartime intelligence operations. Dr. Warren was initially skeptical, having dealt with numerous people claiming to possess secret historical documents. However, when Sarah described the specific details of the seal and provided accurate translations of the German phrases, Dr. Warren's tone changed dramatically. She asked Sarah to overnight copies of the documents to her office, explaining that if they were authentic, they represented a significant historical discovery. 3 days later, Dr. Warren called back with stunning news. The documents were not only authentic, but represented correspondence from Operation Neptune's Web, a classified naval intelligence operation that had successfully identified and neutralized a German espionage network operating along the Gulf Coast. Sarah's grandfather had been an undercover intelligence officer, not a simple enlisted sailor as the family had always believed. Dr. Warren explained that the operation had been so classified that even decades later, much of the information remained restricted. The documents in Sarah's possession filled important gaps in the historical record and proved that the intelligence operation had been far more extensive than previously known. Armed with this validation, Sarah returned to Mr. Thompson at the newspaper. She brought copies of her correspondence with the National Archives and Dr. Warren's official letter confirming the document's authenticity. Thompson read the materials with growing amazement and embarrassment. The editor realized he had made a terrible mistake. His quick judgment and subsequent article had destroyed the reputation of a girl who had actually made a significant historical discovery. Thompson immediately began working on a follow-up story that would clear Sarah's name and celebrate her achievement. However, the damage to Sarah's reputation proved difficult to repair. When Thompson published his correction and apology, many townspeople remained skeptical. Some suggested that Sarah had somehow fooled the experts in Washington. Others claimed that the government officials were just being polite to a young person. The doubt was particularly painful because it came from people Sarah had known her entire life. Her high school history teacher, Mr. Rodriguez, publicly questioned whether a teenager could really have made such an important discovery. The school principal suggested that Sarah might have exaggerated her role in the research process. Sarah's parents found themselves in an awkward position. While they were proud of their daughter's vindication, they were also angry about the months of social isolation and embarrassment the family had endured. The experience had strained their relationships with neighbors and longtime friends. At school, the atmosphere remained tense. Some classmates apologized for their earlier treatment, but others seemed resentful that Sarah had been proven right. The guidance counselor who had suggested psychological counseling now wanted to nominate Sarah for academic awards, creating an uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. Sarah began to realize that being vindicated wasn't the same as being forgiven. The town seemed to hold a grudge against her for making them look foolish. Instead of celebrating her discovery, many people seemed to wish the whole situation had never happened. The stress of the situation began affecting Sarah's academic performance. College applications were due soon, and she struggled to write essays about her achievements when the local reaction had been so mixed. She worried that the controversy would follow her even if she left town for university. One evening, while Sarah was working on her college applications, her mother brought her a piece of mail that would change everything once again. The envelope was thick and official-looking, bearing the seal of the United States Navy Department. Inside was a letter requesting Sarah's presence at a special ceremony in Washington, D.C. The letter from the Navy Department was signed by Admiral Robert Hayes, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations. He requested that Sarah and her family travel to Washington at the Navy's expense to attend a ceremony honoring her contribution to naval history. The letter explained that her research had helped complete the historical record of Operation Neptune's Web and had provided valuable insights into World War II counterintelligence efforts. Sarah's parents were stunned by the invitation. Her father, who had spent months feeling embarrassed by his daughter's situation, suddenly found himself bragging to customers at the garage about the official Navy letter. Her mother immediately began planning what they would wear to meet such high-ranking military officials. The news of the Navy invitation spread through town within hours. Mr. Thompson requested an interview about Sarah's upcoming trip to Washington. The high school principal, who had previously suggested that Sarah had academic integrity issues, now wanted to arrange a special assembly to honor her achievement before she left. However, Sarah felt conflicted about the sudden change in attitude from people who had treated her so poorly. The same classmates who had whispered behind her back now wanted to be associated with her success. Teachers who had questioned her honesty now spoke proudly about having such a distinguished student in their classes. On the morning of departure, a small crowd gathered at the local airport to see Sarah and her family off to Washington. The mayor, who had ignored the controversy for months, presented Sarah with a proclamation declaring her an honorary ambassador of their town. The gesture felt hollow to Sarah, who remembered how isolated she had felt just weeks earlier. The flight to Washington was Sarah's first time on an airplane. As the small Texas town disappeared below the clouds, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about meeting such important military officials. Dr. Warren had arranged to meet them at the airport and accompany them to their hotel near the Pentagon. Dr. Warren turned out to be a warm, energetic woman in her 50s who immediately put Sarah at ease. During the drive from the airport, she explained that Sarah's documents had already been used to correct several historical inaccuracies in official Navy records. The discovery had impressed historians and intelligence experts throughout the military community. The hotel was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Military personnel and government officials filled the elegant lobby, discussing matters of national importance in hushed tones. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the grandeur and significance of her surroundings. That evening, Dr. Warren took the family to dinner at a restaurant frequented by Pentagon officials. She explained more about Operation Neptune's Web and Sarah's grandfather's role in the mission. The intelligence operation had been one of the most successful counter-espionage efforts of the war, preventing several major sabotage attacks on American naval facilities. Sarah learned that her grandfather had volunteered for the dangerous undercover assignment, posing as a sympathetic contact for German agents while secretly documenting their activities. The letters Sarah had translated were actually intelligence reports written in a special code that mixed German and English phrases to confuse enemy interceptors. The next morning, Sarah and her family were escorted to the Pentagon by a Navy lieutenant. The massive building was intimidating, with its endless corridors and constant stream of uniformed personnel. Sarah tried to memorize every detail, knowing that her friends back home would want to hear about everything. They were led to a conference room where several high-ranking officers were waiting. Admiral Hayes was a tall, distinguished man with gray hair and kind eyes. He greeted Sarah warmly, thanking her for her dedication to uncovering historical truth. Other officials included Navy historians, intelligence specialists, and a representative from the National Security Agency. Admiral Hayes explained that the ceremony would be brief but meaningful. Sarah would receive a special commendation for her contribution to naval history, and her grandfather would be posthumously honored for his service in Operation Neptune's Web. The documents she had discovered would be permanently housed in the National Archives. As they prepared for the ceremony, Sarah felt the weight of the moment. Just months earlier, her own community had branded her a liar and attention seeker. Now she stood in the Pentagon, about to be honored by some of the most powerful military leaders in the country. The ceremony took place in a room filled with naval flags and portraits of famous admirals. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride as photographers documented the historic moment. When Admiral Hayes called Sarah forward to receive her commendation, she thought about all the people back home who had doubted her. However, the most significant moment came after the official ceremony. Admiral Hayes asked Sarah to remain behind, while the other guests enjoyed refreshments in an adjoining room. He wanted to speak with her privately about something that hadn't been mentioned in the formal proceedings. The Admiral's expression grew serious as he pulled out a folder marked with security classifications. He explained that Sarah's research had uncovered more than just historical documents. It had revealed information that was still relevant to current national security operations. Admiral Hayes opened the classified folder and spread several documents across the conference table. Sarah recognized some of the handwriting from her grandfather's letters. But these papers were different, more recent, with modern letterheads and computer printouts mixed. Among the older materials, the Admiral explained that Sarah's translation work had helped intelligence analysts identify patterns in the old German code system that were still being used by certain criminal organizations today. Her grandfather's documents contained key information about encryption methods that had evolved over decades but retained their original mathematical foundations. Sarah listened in amazement as the Admiral described how international smuggling rings and terrorist cells had adapted the old World War II intelligence codes for modern communications. The seemingly innocent historical documents she had found in her grandfather's trunk had actually provided crucial insights into current criminal activities. However, this revelation came with a serious complication. Admiral Hayes explained that Sarah's public recognition for the historical discovery had inadvertently exposed her to potential danger. Criminal organizations monitored news stories about code-breaking and intelligence discoveries, always alert for threats to their communication security. The Admiral showed Sarah recent intelligence reports indicating that several dangerous groups had taken notice of the newspaper articles about her discovery. They were concerned that she might possess additional documents or knowledge that could compromise their operations. The situation had become a matter of national security. Sarah felt a chill as she realized that her academic achievement had placed her family in potential danger. The same documents that had brought her recognition and vindication had also made her a target for people who would stop at nothing to protect their criminal enterprises. Admiral Hayes assured Sarah that the Navy was taking the threat seriously. A protection detail had already been assigned to monitor her family's safety, though they had been operating discreetly to avoid causing alarm. The officers would continue their surveillance until the danger had passed. The Admiral also explained that Sarah would need to sign several confidentiality agreements regarding the modern applications of her grandfather's documents. While she was free to discuss the historical aspects of her discovery, she could never reveal how the old codes were being used in current intelligence operations. Sarah signed the documents with trembling hands, understanding that her life had become far more complicated than she had ever imagined. What had begun as a teenager's curiosity about family history had evolved into a matter of international significance and personal danger. When Sarah rejoined her parents, she struggled to act normally despite the shocking information she had just received. Admiral Hayes had advised her not to discuss the security implications with her family, as it would only cause unnecessary worry without improving their safety. The flight back to Texas was tense for Sarah, who found herself studying every passenger and wondering if any of them represented a threat. She noticed that two men in business suits seemed to be traveling to the same destination, and she wondered if they were part of the protection detail the Admiral had mentioned. Upon returning home, Sarah discovered that the town's attitude toward her had completely transformed. The local newspaper had covered her Pentagon ceremony extensively, and suddenly everyone wanted to claim association with the girl who had been honored by Navy admirals. The high school principal announced that the school would establish an annual award in Sarah's name for outstanding historical research. Teachers who had previously questioned her integrity now praised her determination and scholarly abilities. Classmates who had ostracized her now competed for her attention. However, Sarah found it difficult to enjoy her newfound celebrity status. The knowledge that dangerous people might be watching her made every public appearance feel risky. She began declining interview requests and social invitations, preferring to stay home where she felt safer. Her parents were puzzled by Sarah's reluctance to embrace her fame. They had endured months of embarrassment and social isolation, and now they wanted to celebrate their daughter's vindication. Sarah's withdrawn behavior seemed ungrateful and confusing to them. At school, Sarah became hyper-aware of her surroundings. She studied faces in hallways, looking for anyone who seemed out of place. When strangers attended school events or visited the campus, she wondered if they were connected to the criminal organizations Admiral Hayes had mentioned. The stress began affecting Sarah's academic performance and college preparation. She had trouble concentrating on assignments and frequently found herself distracted during class. Her teachers attributed her behavior to the pressure of sudden fame, not realizing she was dealing with security concerns. One evening, while Sarah was working on homework in her bedroom, she noticed a car parked across the street that she hadn't seen before. Two men sat inside, occasionally looking toward her house. Sarah remembered Admiral Hayes' assurance about protection details, but she couldn't be certain whether the men were there to help her or harm her. The uncertainty was becoming unbearable. Sarah realized she needed more information about the threat level and the duration of the security measures. She decided to contact Admiral Hayes directly, using the secure phone number he had provided during their meeting at the Pentagon. Admiral Hayes answered Sarah's call on the second ring, as if he had been expecting to hear from her. His voice was calm and reassuring, as he listened to her concerns about the mysterious car and her growing anxiety about the security situation. The Admiral explained that the men she had observed were indeed part of her protection detail. He apologized for not providing her with more specific information about how the security measures would appear, realizing that the uncertainty was causing additional stress. He assured her that highly trained professionals were monitoring her safety around the clock. However, Admiral Hayes also delivered sobering news about the ongoing investigation. Intelligence agencies had intercepted communications, suggesting that at least 2 criminal organizations were actively seeking information about Sarah and her family. The groups were particularly interested in learning whether she possessed additional documents that hadn't been publicly disclosed. The Admiral explained that the criminals' concerns were actually unfounded. Sarah had turned over all the relevant documents to the National Archives, and there were no additional materials that could threaten their operations. However, the criminal groups didn't know this, and they were unlikely to simply take her word for it. Admiral Hayes outlined 2 options for Sarah and her family. They could continue with the current security arrangements indefinitely, living under discreet but constant surveillance until the criminal interest eventually faded. Alternatively, they could participate in a more dramatic solution that would permanently end the threat. The second option involved what the Admiral called controlled exposure. Sarah would appear to be kidnapped by unknown assailants, during which time she would be safely held at a secure government facility. The fake kidnapping would be designed to look like the work of the same criminal organizations that were actually threatening her. During her supposed captivity, government agents would spread disinformation suggesting that Sarah had been interrogated and had revealed that no additional documents existed. The criminals would believe they had already obtained the information they wanted, removing their motivation to pursue her further. After several weeks, Sarah would be rescued in a dramatic operation that would make national news. The criminal organizations would assume that their competitors had beaten them to the prize, and they would redirect their attention elsewhere. Sarah and her family would be free to resume normal lives. The plan was risky and complex, requiring Sarah to disappear from her normal life for an extended period. She would miss the remainder of her senior year of high school and would need to complete her education through alternative arrangements. However, Admiral Hayes assured her that the Navy would ensure she received full college scholarships and educational support. Sarah was overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision. Both options would fundamentally change her life, but the fake kidnapping scenario offered the possibility of eventually returning to normalcy. The alternative was living under permanent surveillance, never knowing when the threat might escalate. She requested time to discuss the options with her parents, but Admiral Hayes explained that involving them would compromise the operation's security. The fewer people who knew about the plan, the more likely it was to succeed. Sarah would need to make the decision alone and trust the government to handle the details. That night, Sarah lay awake considering her impossible choices. She thought about her dreams of attending college, her plans for studying history and international relations, and her hope of eventually working for the government in some capacity. The situation had already derailed many of those plans, but the fake kidnapping might ultimately provide the best path forward. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would influence Sarah's decision. As she walked to school, she noticed that the usual protection detail car was missing from its normal position. Instead, a different vehicle with tinted windows was parked near the school entrance. Sarah's instincts told her something was wrong. She pretended to drop her books and used the opportunity to look more carefully at the unfamiliar car. Through the windshield, she could see two men who didn't look like government agents. Their clothing and body language seemed more aggressive and less professional than the officers who had been protecting her. Rather than entering the school building, Sarah turned and walked quickly toward the downtown area, where there would be more people around. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed the emergency number Admiral Hayes had given her, hoping that the real protection detail would respond quickly. As she reached the main street, Sarah heard a car engine accelerating behind her. She turned to see the suspicious vehicle approaching rapidly, and she began running toward the police station 3 blocks away. Her heart pounded as she realized that the theoretical danger had suddenly become very real. The car pulled alongside her, and one of the men jumped out and began chasing her on foot. Sarah screamed and ran faster, grateful for the track team training that now seemed like preparation for this terrifying moment. Behind her, she could hear the man shouting something in a foreign language. Just as the pursuer was closing the distance, another car appeared from a side street and blocked his path. 2 men in dark suits emerged quickly and confronted Sarah's attacker. She recognized them as members of her actual protection detail, and she felt overwhelming relief as they took control of the situation. Within minutes, police cars and additional government vehicles surrounded the area. The attempted kidnapping had failed, but it had also proven that the threat was more immediate and serious than anyone had realized. Admiral Hayes would need to accelerate his timeline considerably. Within hours of the attempted kidnapping, Admiral Hayes arrived in Texas with a full security team. The failed attack had eliminated any remaining doubt about the seriousness of the threat, and the situation now required immediate action rather than careful planning. Sarah found herself in the back of an armored vehicle, surrounded by federal agents as they drove to a secure location outside of town. Admiral Hayes explained that the attackers had been members of an Eastern European smuggling organization that had been monitoring her activities for weeks, waiting for an opportunity to grab her without attracting attention. The interrogation of the captured attackers revealed the full scope of the criminal interest in Sarah's discovery. Multiple organizations had been competing to obtain information from her, believing she possessed additional documents that could compromise their operations. The situation had become a race among criminals, with each group trying to reach her first. Admiral Hayes informed Sarah that the fake kidnapping plan was no longer viable. The real attempt had made it impossible to stage a convincing false operation without risking confusion among law enforcement agencies. Instead, Sarah and her family would need to enter a modified witness protection program until the threat could be permanently eliminated. The decision was made for her. Within 6 hours, Sarah was on a military transport plane heading to an undisclosed location. Her parents had been briefed by federal agents and told that their daughter was being relocated for her safety. They would be allowed to visit her periodically, but they couldn't know her exact whereabouts. Sarah spent the next 3 months at a secure government facility that looked more like a college campus than a military installation. She completed her high school requirements through tutoring and online courses, while also receiving training in personal security and threat assessment from former intelligence officers. During her time in protection, federal agencies worked systematically to dismantle the criminal networks that had targeted her. The investigation expanded far beyond Sarah's situation, ultimately leading to arrests and prosecutions across multiple countries. Her grandfather's documents had provided the key to unraveling decades of criminal activity. Admiral Hayes visited Sarah regularly, updating her on the progress of the operation and assuring her that the end of her confinement was approaching. He also helped arrange for her college applications to be processed, despite her unusual circumstances, with several prestigious universities offering full scholarships based on her unique experiences. The operation reached its conclusion when the last of the criminal leaders was arrested in a coordinated international raid. Admiral Hayes personally delivered the news to Sarah, explaining that she was finally free to resume a normal life. However, he also warned her that some aspects of her experience would always remain classified. Sarah's return to her hometown was carefully orchestrated to avoid media attention. She arrived quietly, without fanfare, and was reunited with her parents in an emotional scene that marked the end of their months of separation and uncertainty. The local community had changed during Sarah's absence. The attempted kidnapping had made national news, and the town had gained unwanted attention as the site of international criminal activity. Many residents now understood that Sarah's discovery had been far more significant and dangerous than they had initially realized. Sarah's former critics, including Mr. Thompson at the newspaper and the high school principal, offered genuine apologies for their earlier skepticism. They had learned through hard experience the cost of judging too quickly and the importance of supporting young people who challenge conventional thinking. However, Sarah found that she had changed as much as the town had. The months in protection had given her new perspective on her goals and priorities. She was no longer interested in seeking validation from people who had doubted her, nor was she particularly concerned with local recognition or fame. Admiral Hayes attended Sarah's delayed high school graduation ceremony, presenting her with a special commendation that acknowledged her service to national security, without revealing classified details. In his speech, he spoke about the importance of curiosity, persistence, and moral courage in the face of adversity. Sarah enrolled at Georgetown University that fall, majoring in international relations with a focus on intelligence studies. Admiral Hayes had arranged for her to participate in special programs that would prepare her for a career in government service, should she choose that path. Years later, when Sarah had become Dr. Sarah Martinez and was working for the State Department on international security issues, she would sometimes return to her grandfather's trunk. The documents that had started her incredible journey were now housed in the National Archives, but she kept photocopies as a reminder of how a teenager's curiosity had uncovered secrets that changed history. The small Texas town where it all began had erected a modest monument to Sarah and her grandfather, acknowledging their contributions to national security. However, the full story of what Sarah discovered and the danger she faced remained largely unknown to the public, protected by classification levels that would outlast her lifetime. Admiral Hayes, now retired, would occasionally visit Sarah in Washington. They would have lunch and discuss her current projects, never speaking directly about the classified aspects of her discovery but maintaining the bond forged during those dangerous months when her teenage determination had helped protect national security. Sarah's story became a legend within intelligence communities, though always told in vague terms that protected operational secrets. It served as a reminder that important discoveries could come from unexpected sources, and that the courage to question accepted truth could sometimes uncover secrets that powerful people would kill to protect.